The Mark Stoops era at Kentucky is fraudulent.
We have been hoodwinked, bamboozled,
as they are the only team since 2013 to have not finished in the top half of the SEC when it comes to strength of schedule.
led astray, run amok.
But it actually gets worse than that, as every other team has been in that top 7 at least twice. And it gets even worse than that.
Flat out deceived.
So you're looking at the data and my ugly handwriting. Here's some actual cleaner graphics. But look, everything I've said up to this point, along with Stephen A., sounds like a super hot take. But it's just the truth.
It's a tough, grueling, physical, schedule when you're playing in the SEC.
Oh, really?
A little bit later, we will reveal the true unsung MVP of the Wildcats, and he's actually a strength and conditioning coach. And this is actually just a memo to the rest of the conference. While you play an SEC schedule, the Wildcats normally on average play an ACC to Big 12 schedule. So yes, you have been hoodwinked, bamboozled, deceived, all those words. And like I said, it does actually get worse because the best strength of schedule difficulty for the conference under Mark Stoops has been 10th. So they really haven't been close when it comes to schedule difficulty. And that's what the point of this video is today, to at least spark a discussion. Will any of this actually change? Because as of now, while Kentucky has failed to have a top 10 SEC schedule, every other team outside of Missouri and Texas A&M in the Southeastern Conference has had a top 10 national schedule at least once over the past decade. That just shows you how inequitable it actually is.
Of this schedule, obviously, we don't know how these teams are going to perform, but
our strength of schedule wasn't bad to begin with. Okay, I mean, I sit in the room. I'm on the CFP committee. I've seen the strength of schedules. We're not weak.
So that's Kentucky Athletic Director Mitch Barnhard, and you will hear from him again in this video. And he's right if he's talking about the entire SEC. But individually, as you are seeing right now, the Kentucky strength of schedule is just not it. You'll see a little footnote on some of these graphics here of when the schedule would have been a bottom 3 or 4 schedule in another conference. And as you can see, from 2015 to 2017, it would have been a bottom 3 in 3 other Power 5 conferences. And then if you keep going to 2019, it would have been last in the Big 12, Pac-12, and ACC. But just to show you how the 2020 season actually played out, they did have a nationally ranked number 2. If the 2020 season would have been actually played, it probably would have been more of the same.
Bring it in here. Let's go.
So we've been using ESPN data up to this point, but what's crazy is strength of schedule metrics do fluctuate from site to site. But what has stayed constant is their unfavorable view of Kentucky's strength of schedule. So scrolling down your screen just to speed things up, here is the teamrankings.com view of the Wildcats. As you can see, they still look at them as a very easy strength of schedule every year, with the 9th being their best conference finish, but they do view that 2018 SoS a lot more favorably than most, where if you take a look at, now this is just crazy, sportsreference.com, everyone points to the 2018 and 2021 10-win seasons under Mark Stoops. Sports Reference believed that was the second easiest and the easiest schedules, respectively, in the entire SEC. Not good. So how could such a disparity happen? I understand Texas and Oklahoma are joining the conference, and obviously that could change some things, but at the end I'll explain why it may actually not. But the first thing I want to do is discuss these 3 major points. These are the reasons why the schedule has become so soft and easy for the Wildcats. The first is the SEC East is just weaker than the SEC West, so half the conference just has an easier slate in and of itself. But really the next 2 points are the major ones as to why the Wildcats are way softer than basically everyone. Point number 2 is actually one that has driven me crazy for quite some time, the permanent cross-division rival rule. As many of you know, you play a 12-game schedule everywhere in college football, and the SEC elects to play an 8-game conference schedule, and on top of playing the 7 teams in your division, you had a permanent cross-division rival, and Kentucky got the absolute best you could have gotten in the SEC East with Mississippi State. You could argue Arkansas, I would say Mississippi State. Still, they got a very favorable cross-division team that they play every year, but the rest of the East doesn't outside of one team because of the 6-game rotation for the final conference game. And to be fair, for 2024, Kentucky does draw Alabama as that rotating game, but in a second I'll explain why the schedule is still soft. But for right now, point number 3 is the biggest reason why. It's the Louisville Cardinals. And the first part of it is, well, the Cardinals have stunk since the Charlie Strong, Bobby Petrino prime years. But it's more so the flexibility that the Cardinals provide the Wildcats, and it's actually Louisville that is a big reason why the Wildcats are so successful.
Those 4 games that we have a chance to schedule doesn't mean they're not difficult games, but the separation for an SEC game is a challenge.
You're looking at all the SEC, or should I say Kentucky schedules under Mark Stoops over the past decade, okay? And year after year, what we tend to do when we evaluate any team or any coach over a certain time period is we just go look at the schedule and we go look at the win-loss mark and see a few ranked teams, and wow, Mark Stoops has really improved this program, which he has. But it's been with the help of Mitch Barnhart's schedule manipulation. Because did you know that the Kentucky Wildcats are the only team over the past decade to not begin the season with a Power 5 game at least once?
What?
So I know a lot of you had a very similar reaction, and you're looking at all the schedules now highlighted with the non-conference games, and as you can see, Kentucky's schedules are very soft in the beginning, but I want you to really focus in on that first game. Never do they play a Power 5 team right out the gate. Now, most of what I've shown you up to this point is data related, and all the data shows you that, or is it data? Either way, all the data, whatever, shows you that the Kentucky schedules are way easier than everybody else in the SEC. But what I'm about to share with you is actually a more conceptual thing that makes it even easier for Kentucky. To not play a difficult season opening game is a bigger advantage in college football than any other sport for a few reasons. Now, number one, it's just inherently true about college football. Each and every game just holds so much more value. I think a lot of you know that point. But the second point is actually one that is more coach related, and coaches probably could relate to this more than anyone, but when you really think about it, it's pretty simple. There is no college football preseason, okay? It is the only sport that we have really at all that does not have a preseason. And you can even argue with the transfer portal and all of that, college football preseason would actually be the most valuable to any team because the games are so freaking valuable. So Kentucky not having to play a difficult opponent week 1 essentially gets that scrimmage game at the beginning of the season to see what they really look like. So in the background, you're looking at the season opener from last year. Kentucky gave up a huge drive to Miami of Ohio to be down 7-0 that responded with a nice touchdown here on a spacing concept wide open to the tight end. But Kentucky's coaches and players were very rusty in this game. Later on, they went for it on 4th and 2, and they tried to do the same exact thing, but this time Miami of Ohio was in man coverage, and they were able to work around that pick. And maybe if they were playing a better team, the interceptor here would not fall on his own feet, because if he didn't, this is likely a 99-yard interception return for a touchdown going the other way if, of course, the DB could beat Will Levis in a foot race, which I would like to think that he would have. And then later on in this game, it was only 13-10 at halftime. You also get the home cooking, if you will, on the calls. There was a kickoff return for a touchdown that featured some holdings and a potential block in the back. So, when you play a weak season opening game, it just gives you that much more room. And, one more thing about Kentucky is they also play a very weak week 2 slate. On average, about half of the time they will play a non-Power 5 team in week 2, and the same could be said about week 3. In fact, it's been even softer than week 2, and bam, I'm sure a lot of you are probably curious about the 2020 schedule. As you can see, it is pretty much the same structure if the season had played how it was supposed to be played. So now let's take a look at the actual non-Power 5 teams that Kentucky has played, and it gets even softer because, as you'll notice, none of these teams ended up being any good. There was not a single 9-win team at all during the Stoops tenure in the non-Power 5, which is crazy because, remember, this is an FCS and non-Power 5 level that these teams normally play at. So you'll also notice with the asterisk at the bottom, tied or close at half, there were a ton of close calls. So it wasn't as if they were actually blowing out these teams. And something else you will also notice is the asterisk is oftentimes with the first game of the year. So Kentucky themselves, like the Miami of Ohio game I just showed you, they are never sharp in that first game. Imagine if they actually played a Power 5 team, they would oftentimes have to pay. Take a look at Central Michigan, 1-11 Central Michigan. And remember, this was the 2018 10-win Kentucky Wildcats, the best team under Mark Stoops. They barely scored before the end of half to take a 1-point lead, and that game was really close. Then you take a look at the season opener versus Toledo, a team that ended up going 6-6. You commit 4 turnovers and penalties. So in 2020, you did get the all-conference schedule, and you had to go on the road at Auburn. You lost by 2 possessions, 3 turnovers. Now, you did have some long drives, but overall, very sloppy. Now, this wasn't the season opener in 2021, but you barely beat the FCS Chattanooga Mocs early in the year. And then, of course, as we showed you, another shaky season opener versus Miami of Ohio. And you see a struggle versus 3-9 Northern Illinois. That game was tied at half. Kentucky was able to pull away in the third, but that did end up being a 1-possession game. So these are the weaker non-Power 5 programs. You don't see a Troy. You don't see an Appalachian State, a North Dakota State, teams that have actually been giant slayers. Maybe they pull the upset. You see Kentucky wants no part of Southern Miss again after losing to them. So now, who is the reason why Kentucky has such soft openings? Well, they should actually thank their arch rival, Louisville. Yes, the Cardinals. I know that it sounds contradictory, but it's true, BBN. And remember, we told you about the rule that was put in place in 2016 by Mike Slive that you must play an out-of-conference Power 5 game. The good thing for Kentucky is you already were doing it. Like we said earlier, you play Louisville. But it's not just the fact that you play Louisville. It's that requirement is met at the end of the season. Now, I have been fortunate to know some people in college football scheduling. It is really hard to find out-of-conference games to play if you don't have that permanent out-of-conference rivalry.
We've been able to do that about every 2 to 3 years. We've been able to have 8 home games, and that's been good for us financially. It's helped us a lot. That has been you call it a bonus, if you will, whatever you want to call it. It has been helpful to us.
Boom, I'm looking at you. I know you've already subscribed and rang the bell. And boom, we got some music for this next minute or so because it's going to be a lot of schedules and data and just conceptual things thrown your way. So let's get into it. Obviously, Mitch Barnhard is totally right about it. And I think a lot of college football fans don't realize how big of a deal this actually is. Because in the SEC, of course, you are required to play an out-of-conference P5 game every year. Well, normally you have to meet that requirement at the beginning of every season. That is just how it is. And Kentucky doesn't have to worry about that because they play Louisville each and every season, okay? Now, you're looking at, obviously, a bunch of schedules of some of the more elite teams. We'll get into a few teams in a second that are more so on Kentucky's level. I just want to show you how poorly these teams perform in these week 2 out-of-conference games. Sometimes they're week 1 neutral site games. By having to play Louisville every year, you're not having to make these exotic road trips, right? So, Missouri, they scheduled a home and home versus Kansas State, a really good team, and you got to play them in week 2. And, Kansas State is always well coached, and bam, 12 points. You saw Missouri as the season moved on. They almost beat Georgia. That was by far their worst offensive game of the season. Or you take a school like Mississippi State. They had to play this home and home versus Arizona. Now, you notice they won this game, but because of how the scheduling dynamics work, they had to play a back-to-back road game, which we've done a lot of deep dives on back-to-back road games. They are brutal, especially after playing a track meet versus Arizona. You get back at 4 in the morning from Tucson, and then you have to go on the road and play LSU. If you actually sit down and watch that Mississippi State game, they muffed punts, they dropped wide open passes, missed a bunch of basic tackles. They were gassed. Kentucky, you don't have to worry about that, right? And once again, it's the economics. If you're winning games, guess what? More fans buy in. They buy merch. They actually come to the games. Fans don't care who you're playing. It's the most overrated thing in college football, who you beat. The most important thing is avoiding losses. And when you're just winning, fans want to support winners, even if you're playing the Mud Dogs without Bobby Boucher or whoever it may be. Very simple economics. And then it's also just the expense aspect of it. Now, this is where it gets fascinating. Remember, Kentucky's not the only team that plays an out-of-conference, end-of-season, Power 5 rivalry game.
You just change your uniform, talk a little game, dance around, put on some stupid sunglasses, and you could change a climate. But to change a culture is at the core.
But at SEC Media Days, he talked about stupid sunglasses and dancing. Put them on, God. Put them
on. That was so freaking good. I love me some Shane Beamer, and I don't necessarily dislike Mark Stoops. I hope these two continue to go at it because it's good for the sport. Now, a lot of you know that South Carolina is a lot like Kentucky in that they have a permanent out-of-conference team that they play as a rival on rivalry week, and that, of course, is Clemson. So I think every one of you would agree that Clemson is a far more difficult team to play than Louisville. To add more to it for South Carolina's schedule is their permanent cross-division rival is Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M has been mid, but they do recruit a far better athlete than Mississippi State, and I would buy more stock in Texas A&M moving forward than Mississippi State. But you would think that South Carolina would do the same exact thing as Kentucky, right? Not schedule any other Power 5 teams in the non-conference. But no, they are not cowards. They actually decide to be bold. This schedule is absolutely brutal, and they elected to play North Carolina to start the freaking season. But it doesn't stop there. You will see in 2015 they started the season with North Carolina. 2013 they started the season with North Carolina. They in 2017 they started the season with North Carolina State. Once again, these aren't just like bottom dweller teams. These are decent teams. So Florida and Georgia are the only other schools with out-of-conference games versus the P5 on rivalry week. Now, this isn't the best comparison to Kentucky because they do recruit a far better athlete, but it's still true. They actually also oftentimes schedule difficult games out of conference early in the year. And what's even more impressive, Georgia, Florida, and most notably South Carolina will continue to challenge themselves in the out-of-conference P5. Whereas Kentucky, you would think now that they have an established coach that they would finally be bold. Well, here's what I'll do. As I show you their out-of-conference schedules, I want you to hear in full from Mitch Barnhart and Bob Stoops. I said Bob Stoops and Mark Stoops.
We've kept a scheduling pattern for us that has worked effectively well.
Leading the way on winning the game.
Yep.
Is that accurate?
Absolutely accurate. There's no mystery in that. I'm a believer in 8. I believe in 8 for a lot of reasons. I believe in 8 because I think, ours is a hard league. The wear and tear on our student athletes. Throw in 9 and then have another A5 game if we're mandated to keep that game. That would be 10, and we only have 2 choices to find other games to play. From a financial perspective, there's concerns in terms of home and away. From a physical toll on our student athletes, There is that concern because of depth in our program. We want to make sure we have enough depth to manage all of that. And I'll just do the quick math for you. You have a chance to be 16-0, 15-1, 14-2, 13-3. You do the math. If it's a conference game, you're 8-8. And there's no hiding. You've just picked up 8 losses for your league. So as you think about bowls, if you think about CFP, we can all talk about, is really cool to bring other teams in. We're doing that right now. We can make the rotation in our league with 8 games. We can rotate through and play those teams that are all home and away. We can figure that out. We've got that in our system to be able to do that. So everybody gets to rotate through in a 4-year period of time. We can do that. So there's really no need to go to 9 to say that we're going to get a fresh face on our schedule. There's no need to do that.
The majority was 8. And reason being is a lot of us have crossover games, South Carolina, Clemson, and Louisville. We have Louisville, and, we want to keep that. And, to play 9 conference games and Louisville, I mean, that's tough.
So basically, they're scared. They definitely don't want 9, and they definitely want to keep this soft non-conference schedule. You've seen 23 and 24. Now take a look at 2025, 2026, 2027. Here's 2028. And for good measure, they already have the opener for 2029 set up. As you can see, Murderers Row, #sarcasm.
You can't keep getting away with it!
And Barnhart will continue to get away with it until we actually have a discussion about it. If this is even right or wrong, I'll say this. None of this is illegal. They're going by the SEC rules. It's just they are doing the absolute bare minimum. And look, if Shane Beamer wants to make SEC Media Today spicy, he should bring this up, or somebody should ask Kentucky about it, because while the Gamecocks are getting ready for the next coming of Justin Herbert, Mark Stoops will be preparing for Ball State, an under 500 non-Power 5 team. I'm going to need you in the comments section. I'm actually going to, if you guys want to, I'll do a separate video on Mark Stoops as a coach. Notice, none of this really has anything to do with his actual results other than us showing you how weak those non-Power 5 games were. And obviously, we have focused mostly on 2016 to now because that's when the glory Mark Stoops days really began at Kentucky. And look, I already know what the comment section is going to say. We were nothing before Mark Stoops got here, and he's got more wins than Bear Bryant here at Kentucky, and I get it. But this video has everything to do with the future because obviously these schedule dynamics are about to change, but how big and how will it change? Now, the first thing is maybe, just maybe, Mitch Barnhard has this thing figured out. And maybe the rest of the SEC is not doing a smart thing, especially South Carolina and Florida in particular, scheduling these very difficult out-of-conference P5 matchups. Now, obviously, the other teams that don't have the out-of-conference P5, rivalry week game, they have to go out there and schedule it. And I actually went and looked at some future schedules for some comparable teams to Kentucky. Ole Miss and Texas A&M over the years has had some weak schedules, partially because of their cross divisions versus South Carolina and Vanderbilt. But these teams obviously do have some difficult games. Most notably, Ole Miss has a home-and-home coming up with USC. And another thing that stood out to me is Missouri, normally a team that you could compare to Kentucky over the past decade or so. Well, Missouri actually voted for the 9-game conference schedule. They want a more competitive SEC, which is honestly bold and arguably kind of stupid, but they are the only top 15 recruiter in the SEC that really wanted it, and that is commendable. But I'm pretty sure Mitch Barnhart, you could just tell, and that's why I posted the full clip, he is very passionate about keeping this thing at 8. So this is why if I was a Kentucky fan or if I was a Mark Stoops fan, I would be very worried. After studying this program over the past month, you need to ask yourself a very simple question. Is it the schedule that has won you all these games under Mark Stoops, or is it actually Mark Stoops' coaching? And I'm really going to need your help in the comment section. I want BBN or just anyone to give me what you believe is Mark Stoops' most impressive win at Kentucky. It's kind of hard to pick one, right? There's not a whole lot of them. And look, when you hear, people talk about, Mark Stoops, they say, hey, he beats the teams he's supposed to beat, but never really, steps up to the level of competition versus the elite. Well, that's the thing. That's why the schedule format is so unbelievably important. And let's just say I'm not able to get around to the next video where I go into more detail about why I think this Mark Stoops train is about to stop. It's because this past decade, this man has been so incredibly lucky for so many different reasons. So I'm going to be honest, I really do think, though, this next year's Kentucky schedule sets up very nicely, and I think this team could be very good. I like what Stoops has done in the portal, bringing in that USC offensive tackle, and then obviously Leary. And yes, this looks like the toughest schedule according to ESPN Metrics. They have it as 7th in the SEC and 13th overall in the nation, so that's pretty impressive. But Barrett's Elite, CBS Sports, has Kentucky as the 9th best schedule. And when you really look at it, this does give Kentucky some breaks. Obviously, the very soft opening month. But the Tennessee game, the Volunteers will be coming off a back-to-back road game scenario. Once again, historically, that's not good news for the Volunteers, and Kentucky will be coming off a bye week. They get Alabama at home. So I won't give you my final record prediction just yet, but there's a lot to like about this 2023 schedule. But I understand, I already know what's going to happen in the comment section. It's just going to be filled today with, well, did you know what the program looked like before Stoops? And I am so ready for that. But I'm more so projecting the future because in 2024, I think that's when the wheels are finally going to come off, and I have a few reasons as to why. You notice that first road game versus Akron, I think that's going to be tricky because, once again, Kentucky's always kind of rusty in that season opener, and it's going to be the first time they've been away from Lexington in a season opener in half a decade, so I think that's going to be tough. But really, part of Mitch Barnhart's genius is with Louisville. Remember, Louisville is a team that they have not ever once recruited inside the top 30 nationally. And that's about where Kentucky is right now. And now with Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC, that is 2 more top 15-ish recruiters that are joining the conference. So you're looking at a few schedules. Yet again, I know you guys are tired of seeing it, but highlighted are teams that annually recruit inside that top 15 mark. And you notice Kentucky never plays more than 4 in a calendar year. So that's because Louisville being, locked in, Mississippi State in the East and all of that. Now that there's going to be no more divisions, Kentucky in 2025 will play at minimum 5 recruiters in the top 15. 5. That's going to be a record most during the Stoops tenure. So I think that 2024, they won't have Leary anymore. I think that's when everything is going to start melting down for a man they just handed an $8.6 million a year check to. Kentucky, what they've done with the schedule is actually pretty genius because, once again, they do not recruit in the top 30. Most of the SEC recruits in the top 20 to 25. Kentucky's recruiting has gotten slightly better, but overall they're in the low 30s recruiting-wise. And look, it's a basketball school, right? Kentucky fans are more so watching football to get ready for basketball. By getting all these early wins, it gets the fans locked in, and I just think it's absolutely just genius that they're getting away with it. But at the same time, it's cowardly, right, to never actually challenge yourselves, which is why if Kentucky were to do such a thing, I have the absolute perfect team for them, Cincinnati, right? Kentucky actually has as many players from the state of Ohio as they do Kentucky during the 247 sports recruiting era, which is crazy to think about. Cincinnati's only an hour and a half away from Lexington, so you're looking at a bunch of other reasons as to why this would make a lot of sense. Get on the phone, Kentucky. And look, in defense of their schedule, it's not their fault that the other parts of the SEC made really bad coach hires, and Louisville, just fell off a cliff since the Charlie Strong era. And look, the Louisville teams under Satterfield and Petrino weren't bad. They definitely had good quarterback play. They just weren't great. Now, I will say Kentucky's schedule would get better if Jeff Brom were to make Louisville a far more consistent program, but we shall see what happens there. And I just want to show you what the 2012 schedule looked like for Kentucky. You notice this was the best Louisville team. You had to start the season off on the road, end the season with Tennessee, and this nationally ranked schedule was 8th. This got Joker Phillips fired. Now, he wasn't really that great before that, but still, the difficult schedule was not advantageous from Kentucky, and they might have just learned from their mistakes. But point being, it could be stronger. So I'll be honest, I don't think anything's going to be said or done about this. I don't really feel anybody in the SEC would care too much, but I think that they should. Keep in mind, Mitch Barnhard is probably the most well-respected AD. He launched the careers of quite a few athletic directors in the SEC right now. And look, Mitch is really good at his job, as you can see with the schedule formation, and the APR at Kentucky is really good. Obviously, their baseball programs and other programs have gotten pretty good. So, I don't think anyone's going to say anything about it, but I think they probably should for two reasons. The lesser of which is the comparison, right? Coaches get compared in the SEC quite a bit, and I don't think that's fair at all because, well, the SEC schedules are not equitable at all. Now, it is tough to reach schedule equity, but still, it's crazy to me that I still see these archaic win and loss comparisons between two coaches, right? A few online comparisons between Sam Pittman and Mark Stoops. It is without question Sam Pittman has been more impressive than Stoops recently, and a lot of that is because of the schedule. By the way, Arkansas did what I would like Kentucky to do, which is schedule Cincinnati in the out-of-conference. But the second thing here is the more important thing. And it's a little bit more macro in nature for all SEC teams, but I do feel it's important. If you are a team that never actually plays a top 5 or a top 7 schedule in your conference, are you really part of the conference, right? You are getting, a leg up on everybody, and you are reaping the benefits of that very thing. And I understand, trust me, I've totally gotten the logic from Kentucky and how they've done it. But if I was another SEC team, I would be very furious about that, right? Because when you go recruit, you sell the SEC. The brand equity that comes along with playing in the best conference in America really does matter, and Kentucky obviously has taken advantage of that. That would perturb me if I was Shane Beamer, if we are, or whoever it may be, when I am competing for a recruit, or if I was a coach of a team in a different conference, right? And you're competing for a kid in Big Ten country that Kentucky oftentimes does. It's very interesting. Now, as we already shown you, just by the sheer amount of recruiters, it automatically has gotten tougher for the 2024 schedule. But it is not guaranteed how the 2025 and 2026 schedules will actually shape themselves up. I did not say that smoothly at all. My brain is fried. But look, when it comes to making the absolute perfect, most equal schedule, it is impossible to do that. But what I can say unquestionably is if there was a 9-game SEC conference schedule, there would not be as big of a divide, because if there was the 9-game conference schedule, it would be a rotating door of 6 other opponents that you would play once every 2 seasons. And, of course, you would have your 3 permanent teams. That way you can't really dodge anybody. There's not a scenario where you're only playing Alabama once every 6 years like Kentucky is having to do this year. But if you keep it an 8-game conference schedule, and let's just say Greg Sankey and the SEC want to do their absolute best to keep the 8-game conference schedule while at the same time keeping a lot of these traditional non-main rivalries, so let's say Alabama, Tennessee, or Georgia, Auburn, or whatever, it's just going to pile up the schedule inequities yet again, and teams like Kentucky will be able to take advantage of that, as they've done already with the schedules being the way that they are now. So it just comes down philosophically, whoever you are watching this, how do you feel about that? Because I will tell you, if the 9-game conference schedule happened, you will not see things that you saw today. Now, I want to shout out a man that does not get enough credit for making this vision happen, and, well, I will actually let Mitch do the honors.
And for where we have built our program and the way we have strategically scheduled, and I'll give Mark Hill a lot of credit for the way we've scheduled, and Coach Stoops for the ability to be flexible in what we're doing.
Now, surprisingly, there is a Kentucky actually current strength and conditioning coach named Mark Hill. I heard he's pretty good, but I'm actually talking about the other Mark Hill. He is actually a former strength and conditioning coach at Kentucky, so shout out to him. You know, Mitch is busy doing all sports. This is a guy that has helped keep the Wildcats on track. So now, one thing that I would be interested in knowing is maybe Mark Stoops has went to the brass at Kentucky and said, hey, let's actually put somebody more difficult in our non-conference. Maybe that's happened, but I don't know. That's why I'm going to need you in the comment section today. Give me your thoughts, honest thoughts on today's video. Let me know if you like this deep dive format. Obviously, lots of fancy B-roll. Shout out to KSR, Kentucky Wildcats TV, and so many others. I really enjoyed doing this. If you want me to do another one like this, pick a program, pick a team, pick a topic. I would love to look into it. And if you are a super diehard SEC football fan, bang and bang, here's some more content for you to look at. I'll post the part 2 on Stoops if I actually get around to it right here, okay? It is Power Hour SEC. Boom! And tonight, lemon pepper chicken wings. Let's go.